Well, with the Brexit deadline drawing closer, talk of shutting Parliament to force through a no deal and accusations of early electioneering politicians in Westminster and indeed the commentators writing about them find themselves in uncharted waters. So, what's the way through the Brexit mess, and with the deadline fast approaching, what's the most likely outcome? Going to talk about that in some detail, joined by Guido Fawkes reporter Tom Harwood and the head of mobilisation at Our Future, Our Choice, Phoebe Potter. Hello to you both. We've chatted previously and I thought it might be fun to get you both in.
Definitely.
So, ladies first, where on earth should we start? We're told that the Prime Minister is not electioneering. I'm making myself comfortable. The Prime Minister is not electioneering, but he is pledging something like £575 million a day at the moment.
Yes. Well, I mean, he can say he's not electioneering. I think he's very clearly planning for an election at some point. And he's certainly trying to sweeten the deal. He's trying to throw out a lot of promises, which I don't think he'll be able to fulfil. He's certainly a lot of this money that he's promising. Philip Hammond warned that this should be set aside to deal with consequences of a no-deal Brexit, and he shouldn't be promising it at the moment, I don't think.
Well,
already he's frowning.
I don't know. I mean, when people say, oh, he's doing all of these popular things, he must be gearing up for an election, shouldn't a government usually be pursuing things that are generally popular with the electorate? That's sort of, in my view, is sort of what a government should be aiming to do, to try and make the country better for everyone. So, yeah, there might be an election. You've got the money coming down the road. That's certainly true. And it's, I mean, let's look at where the finances are today. In 2010, when the Conservative Party came into government, the government was borrowing £1 in every 4 it spent. It's now borrowing £1 in every 36 it spends. So yes, there's still a deficit, but the deficit fits within those fiscal rules that Philip Hammond has been so assiduously sticking to. So there is a bit of room for manoeuvre that will still allow us to keep our debt falling as a proportion of GDP. So there is some money to spend to try and ease those pressures that are being faced right now.
There's some money to spend, sure, but I think what Boris Johnson's doing is he's trying to tie things up in bows which aren't really there. So we heard that he gave he freed up, gave a 1.8 billion, I think he said, to the NHS. Actually, it turns out that that money wasn't given to the NHS. It wasn't new money. It was money that had been freed up. It's a bit like taking a £10 note and borrowing it and then giving it back to them and saying, oh, look at me, this is a brilliant gift that I've given back. It's not what he's doing. He's not giving money for things. He is promising money that he won't be able to spend. He is promising money that is actually not new money. It's already just in the system. It's being freed up. And you know, we can't stand for that.
Well, it's going precisely to projects that people want to see. So 20 new hospital upgrades across the country, rather than the sort of back management money that it was pledged to before in a lot of cases. But there is some new money there as well. And what I think Theresa May really failed at as Prime Minister was communication. That was always her sort of Achilles heel. And so I don't know how much of the country actually knows that the NHS is getting an extra £394 million every single week by the end of this Parliament. That's something that was never really communicated. I want to see it on buses going out across the country so that everyone can see how much more money's going into the NHS.
I really think we should avoid any more buses with promises about what's going to be given to the NHS, personally. Yeah.
But you know, there is a bit of debate. Let's talk about the NHS money and then we'll move on to talk about other things. I mean, is it new money or is it not? Depends on who you listen to as to whether or not it is. You obviously don't think it is. You think it probably is.
Yes, as I said, it's been agreed that actually this money was, I think it was £1 billion of the 1.8 billion that was promised was already in the system. So it's not new money that's been given. Boris Johnson's like, money doesn't grow on trees, and he can't pretend to the country that it does. And there is some money that he is pledging to the country for projects, but that is money that Philip Hammond, as you rightly pointed out, so carefully put away because they know that no-deal Brexit could be such a disaster that we will need to mitigate that economic disaster with this money. And Boris Johnson shouldn't be promising it to the people for projects that he won't be able to fulfil.
So there are different ways that you can mitigate no-deal. And actually, some of the bad problems that were being predicted about no deal will not happen if we properly prepare before it happens. So using the energies of government, and one of the most dynamic ministers in government right now, Michael Gove, in charge of that project, so that there is that preparation going up, there is that capacity being built up, so that all of these sort of scare stories don't actually come into fruition. I agree that if we were to leave immediately today with no deal, there would be some real bumps in the road. But those 3 months that we have now to prepare, to get ready for that, means that it won't be a crash out, it'll be a managed exit. And I think that's what people want to to see?
I don't think it will be. I mean, all you're talking about also, let's be clear, is damage limitation of no deal. We're still talking about the damage limitation, not opportunities that it will give us.
Oh, there are huge opportunities.
But anyway, it won't be a crash out. What it will be is we can mitigate the probably immediate chaos of the first maybe days or weeks, if possible. But what it will be, it's like a slow puncture that is going to ruin the country. It is not something that we can mitigate for years to come. We can't prepare for that.
On day one of leaving the European Union, we get complete control over our tariff schedules with the whole world. So we'll be able to set our own tariffs on goods that come into the country. We'll be able to slash tariffs on agriculture, for example, cut costs for people buying food, buying clothing, buying footwear, these essentials that people, particularly the poorest people in the country, really rely on. We'll be able to make those goods cheaper by ourselves without having to go and beg to Brussels to do it for us. That's a really exciting prospect that I'm looking forward to.
I mean, you say that, but actually it's been predicted that food prices are due to rise by £190 a year if we crash out with no deal. So saying that it's going to get cheaper for us is just not true.
That's only if we change literally nothing about our tariff schedules. The fact about leaving with... so many of these predictions are just sort of saying if everything stayed exactly as it was and we use none of the new freedoms that are granted to us. But actually the exciting thing about no deal is that we'll be able to change our domestic economy. And remember that 80% of our economy is domestic. About 10% is trade with the EU and about 10% is trade with non-EU countries. We'll be able to do new and exciting things to our domestic economy and pursue sort of regulatory innovation that will allow us to be one of the most dynamic and exciting economies in the world. And that's something that can make everyone in this country a lot better off.
I'm glad you pointed out that 10% of our trade is with the EU. I think it's maybe slightly higher, maybe around 13%, but actually that is a huge proportion of our economy which we will lose if we crash out with no deal.
We're not going to lose it.
Well, we won't have the trade deals. We won't have the free trade that we currently have with the EU, our biggest trading partner.
We don't have free trade deals with New Zealand, but I bought a bottle of New Zealand wine in Tesco the other day. We don't have free trade deal with the United States of America, and yet 1 million people go to work in US companies every day, and 1 million US people go to work in UK companies every day. There is still a huge transaction that is done with countries that operate on WTO terms.
Well, actually, I mean, I'm glad you brought up America because that's quite a theme of the day. But the trading that America could bring, I think some people predicted that it could account for maybe 0.2% of our economy versus the almost 13% we have with the EU. So it's going to go no way to fulfilling the gap that we're going to lose from our biggest trading partner, our closest trading partner.
It's a total fantasy to say that we would lose every single, all of the trade with the EU. I think actually we're going to retain that trade, but add on new opportunities and possibilities beyond that. What's really exciting is not just the sort of yes benefits, but not massive benefits of new trade deals with countries, but actually the regulatory innovation that we can then pursue domestically, because the largest amount of our economy is still domestic. And so having new freedoms, giving the government more levers to pull and push and twist and twizzle and whatever, it's like bop it, but much more serious. And so having those new policy directions that we can go in can make everyone much better off and make politics much more accountable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very glad you've recognised that, you know, the importance of our trade deal with the EU. They're our closest and biggest trading partner. But the idea that you can say we're going to keep those trade deals and then we're just going to add things on, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to lose all those trade deals if we leave the customs union, if we leave the single market. We lose that right to free trade across the EU, our biggest and closest trading partner. And if we want to renegotiate with the EU, which we will have to do if we leave with no deal, we will have to start renegotiating. Anyone who says that Brexit is going to end on 1st November, whatever happens, is completely lying. We will be back to square one, except for we'll be negotiating from a much weaker position.
Stronger position.
I don't know how that is a stronger position.
I'll tell you why it's a stronger position, because we'll have already seen that we'll have called the EU's bluff on things like the Northern Irish border. Ireland itself has laid out proposals in the event of no deal, whereby checks happen, for example, away from the border. Exactly what members of the European Research Group, these Eurosceptic Conservative MPs, have been saying for years almost. There are all of these contingency plans that will come into place that will mean that actually we're already operating under a situation whereby there's a almost invisible Northern Irish border. So that will sort of not be the sort of big issue it is now. There are lots of other aspects. We'll be out of this horrible time limit that Article 50 gives us. There are loads of ways in which we become actually in a stronger position to negotiate outside of the European Union. But all that being said, I think it's still more likely that we're going to leave with a deal than without one, simply because we have this credible path to pursue in terms of leaving on WTO terms at the end of October.
I mean, I just don't think that is true. I think the EU are perfectly aware that we are going to be far harder hit than them if we leave with no deal. They know that. The UK is in a far worse position if it leaves with no deal, even if we prepare for it 3 months, which, you know, is certainly will ease the transition slightly, but can never, ever sort of make up for the years of difficulty that it's going to cause, particularly with a shock to the economy. And you talked about Northern Irish border. I don't think the Northern Irish border should be something that we're talking about calling our bluff on. We should not be playing Russian roulette.
The EU should not be playing games with it. I totally agree.
The EU is not playing games with it. The EU and the UK are both playing games with it because it wasn't mentioned in the 2016 referendum. We did not talk about it. It is an impossible situation to remedy.
I find it really, really sad that the EU is sort of using it as a stick to try and get the sort of deal they want. Actually, what would be really, really sad is if the EU's intransigence over the backstop is what delivers no deal and offers some of those bumps in the road that the EU is saying that the backstop is trying to avoid. It's an entirely ironic device in that sense. If it's trying to avoid a hard border, but is the thing that actually stops a deal being able to be reached, then clearly that's a political game that the EU is playing.
I don't think that is a political game. I think the backstop, people like to paint it as something that the EU has imposed on the UK. It's not at all. It is something there that is to protect UK citizens and the Good Friday Agreement, one of the most important peace agreements we've had.
It's a disaster for the Good Friday Agreement. The architect...
The backstop is a disaster for the Good Friday Agreement.
Lord Trimble, the architect of the Good Friday Agreement, has said that the backstop absolutely rides roughshod over so many elements of that agreement that actually a fundamental underpinning of that agreement is the integrity of the United Kingdom. And the backstop in terms of potentially dividing the United Kingdom, in terms of pushing and pulling on those constitutional ties that we have, it's actually... We shouldn't only listen to this from the Northern Irish nationalist perspective. We should listen to the unionist voices in Northern Ireland as well. And most unionist voices in Northern Ireland are saying the backstop itself actually breaks the terms of the Good Friday Agreement.
I mean, I'm glad you're worried about the risk of the backstop to the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, the risks of no deal are so much greater for the Good Friday Agreement than if we keep the backstop, which definitely maintains that there will be no hard border in Northern Ireland. Whereas if we leave with no deal, there is absolutely no guarantee. Maybe you can mitigate the first few weeks and days because we will keep the border open and we will, de facto, just be dealing in the customs union anyway. But if we leave with no deal, that border is seriously at risk. There is no long-term solution to it. These technological solutions that everyone keeps talking about, no one can actually explain what they are. They're sort of saying maybe we'll have the technology in a few years or 10 years' time. That is certainly not good enough.
Existing technology.
Explain to me what those technologies are.
Ireland itself has said that we will be that this can entirely be kept open in terms of a no-deal situation. No one is talking about building infrastructure on the border. The UK government is certainly not going to build infrastructure on the border. The Irish government has said it's not going to be training dogs or building infrastructure on the border. And lo betide, the EU comes in and tries to build a border there. No one wants a border there. Simply, no one's going to build a border there. What's going to happen is that goods will be checked at the point of sale or the point of delivery on either side of the border. And in that way, the border will be kept open. That's what the Irish have been saying. That's what the Eurosceptics
moves the border elsewhere, doesn't it? But, well, I mean, some might suggest. But anyway, I'm not getting involved in this discussion. It's not for me for today. It's for you two. Generation Y, as we called you.
Absolutely.
More from them in just a moment.